My name is Catherine Schulte. I'm with the Tennessee Department of Environment and Conservation, and I'd like to thank you for attending this year's virtual Sustainable Transportation Forum and Expo. As you may know, the forum is collaboratively organized by the Tennessee Department of Environment and Conservation, the Tennessee Department of Transportation, and the East Tennessee Clean Fuels Coalition. This forum typically takes place as an annual conference where attendees share and discover projects that can reshape what is possible in transportation and mobility. This year's Sustainable Transportation Forum and Expo will be held as a free two-part webinar series and other pre-recorded content that will promote pedestrian travel and safety, opportunities for enhancing transportation sustainability, multimodal transportation, and other aspects of creating a more resilient and sustainable transportation system. We are thrilled by this year's virtual turnout, which is a testament to the interest and commitment to these topics in our great state. Today's webinar on pedestrian travel and safety will feature a moderated discussion with our expert panelists and will explore key aspects of road and city design, which help enhance pedestrian travel and safety, the overall benefits of granting greater access to pedestrian travel, and work that their various organizations are engaging in to improve walkability and bikeability for all Tennesseans. As a reminder, this webinar is part one of the forum's 2022 virtual webinar series discussion. We hope you can join us for our second webinar series this Friday the 21st from 10 a.m. to 11:30 a.m. For your convenience, we put the registration information for the remaining webinar sessions in the chat box. Before we get started, I would like to go over a few WebEx housekeeping items so that you know how to participate in today's webinar. You are all muted upon entry and will remain muted throughout the webinar to reduce background noise and associated audio feedback. We have also deactivated audience cameras to help with webinar bandwidth. To submit a question for the Q&A, which will follow today's speaker presentations and moderated discussion, you can submit written questions into the chat box to our behind-the-scenes WebEx host, Mr. Caleb Powell. You may submit these questions via the chat box at any time during the webinar. Caleb will hold all questions until the Q&A session begins at the end of today's session. Please note that both webinars in this week's webinar series have been approved for CM credits for AICP members of the American Planning Association. These webinars can also count towards the newly established Sustainability Resilient CM credit requirement. In order to receive these credits, please attend the webinar session and log your credits afterwards using APA's online CM credit log. While these credits have been approved, the webinars are not yet available in APA's online CM credit log. Please look for them to appear within the next week or so. If they don't appear by then, or if you have any other questions, please reach out to Susan Steffenhagen at susan.steffenhagen@tn.gov, and Caleb is going to put her email address and instructions and in the chat box, excuse me. Now I want to go ahead and hand it over to Caleb, who's going to run us through the Mentimeter portion of our webinar today.
Thanks, Katie. All right, so what we're going to do today, we're going to have 4 short questions through Mentimeter. I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with Mentimeter. So I'm going to share my screen, and we're going to ask 4 short questions. If you want to go ahead and get on www.menti.com on your phone or on another browser, then you will, and hopefully you guys can see my screen. So I'm going to give everyone a second to pull that up. Like I said, on the top of the screen, you should be able to see www.menti.com, and then there's the code for our questions that we've got. It's 3352-7624. So if you'll go ahead, and so our first question is, what sector do you represent today? So we're seeing state government, local and regional government. We got some consultants in here. Okay. We're getting some citizen activists or interested person. We've got nonprofit. So we've got 25 people that have answered. That's about we've got about 20 to 30 more people that can answer. So give everybody a little bit of time to answer those questions. And these questions are to sort of help our presenters and us as the Tennessee Department of Transportation, Tennessee Department of Environment and Conservation, sort of build out what who's our audience, who we're talking to. So very appreciative of you guys taking time to answer these questions for us. All right, we've got a lot of answers here. Like I said, very appreciative for taking the time to. Ooh, we had somebody private industry just join. All right. Well, everything's slowing down now, so I will go ahead and move to the next question. How often do you walk or bike to work or other destinations? So there's 4 different options here. You can do never, once or twice a month, once or twice a week, or almost daily. Okay, so I like the almost daily. I didn't realize that was going to be such a popular answer. I'd like to bike or walk to work, but I live in Murfreesboro and work downtown Nashville, so it just doesn't seem very very like a solid answer for me. I use transit whenever I can. Well, awesome. We've got about the same people that answered from the last one, so good to see. Good to see where you guys are. All right, our next question. So this gets into a little bit more of what we're going to be talking about today. On a scale of 1 to 5, how would you rate the biking and walking infrastructure in your community? 1 being very poor and 5 being excellent infrastructure for walking and biking. So what that's doing, that number that you're seeing on the scale, that's going to give us our average. We've had 43 people answer, and so our average is about a 2.1. So a little bit lower than we'd like, actually quite lower than we'd like, but I mean, that's a reason for today's webinar, is to talk about the opportunities and the programs that are around to try to make biking and walking infrastructure better in the community. So thanks for answering that, and we're going to go to our final question. On a scale of 1 to 5, how would you rate the safety of pedestrian travel in your community? So, you know, how safe as a pedestrian walking around your community, how safe do you feel, or is there opportunities for you know, walkability and safety in your community? Okay, so you know, we're averaging about the same as the last question. So definitely a lot of opportunity in the communities around the state, and hopefully that what you hear today will make you feel a little bit better about the walkability and safety in your community. So thanks everyone for being a part of that. And next, what we're going to do is we are going to do a short video. Before we get into our panel, we wanted to showcase a video that was made by one of our excellent forum planners, the Tennessee Department of Transportation. They have prepared a short video on how to use transit options in Tennessee to help encourage attendees of today's webinar to use the sustainable transportation modes available to them in addition to walking and biking. So we will move right over to the video. All right, so I will pass it back over to our MC, Katie. Thank you for allowing me to get those questions in the video.
Thank you, Caleb. Without further ado, I am pleased to introduce our moderator today, Erin Hafkinshiel, who will introduce our panelists. Erin is the Executive Director for Mobility and Transportation at Vanderbilt University. She served as the Director of the Mayor's Office of Transportation and Sustainability for Nashville Mayors David Briley and Megan Berry from 2016 to 2018. Her previous experience includes philanthropic and consulting work for California Environmental Associates, the Bay Area Council, and the William and Flora Hewlett Foundation. Erin was a 2008 U.S. Fulbright Scholar to China, where she studied urban planning and transportation. She is pursuing a PhD in civil engineering at Vanderbilt University. She holds a master's in public policy and urban planning from Harvard University and a BA in political economy of industrialized societies from UC Berkeley, where she was also captain of the varsity women's lacrosse team. Erin, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. I just try to have as many mouthfuls in my bio as possible. Thank you for that introduction. Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. I'm so pleased to be here. As Katie said, I'm Erin Hafkinshiel. I'm Executive Director of Mobility and Transportation at Vanderbilt, and I'm very honored to be moderating this panel today. Pedestrian and bike safety issues are of increasing importance to Vanderbilt. We are likely the largest pedestrian trip generator in the county, if not the state. And many of our undergraduates had to live off campus last year due to social distancing and COVID. And so many of them had to cross West End and 21st Avenue daily to get to class, really raising awareness across campus about how dangerous those corridors are for pedestrians. And sadly, in June 2020, one of our Vanderbilt graduate students was hit and killed while in the crosswalk at 31st Avenue and West End Avenue. And even more unfortunate, there have been no additional safety measures installed at that intersection. Her death has been treated as inevitable. Unfortunately, we are seeing this trend across the state and across the country. In 2019, nearly 40,000 people in the United States lost their lives in traffic crashes. And while this was a decrease over the previous year, the national decline is actually being driven by only a handful of states. Tennessee, unfortunately, is not one of them. Tennessee is one of 6 states in the country that's seeing percentage increases in traffic deaths over 5% each year. Metro Nashville is also breaking grim records. In 2019, a record-breaking 30 pedestrians died, which was double the previous annual average that we've been seeing sort of 5 to 10 years previous to that. The fact of the matter is that our transportation system prioritizes cars and the people who can afford them. However, nearly 30% of Americans don't own a car or can't drive. Many of them are low income and people of color. When they cross the street, we blame them for getting in the way. Streets designed for cars impose insurmountable obstacles on pedestrians and limits their access to safe, affordable transportation options. We can and must change our approach to safety and better prioritize and protect our most vulnerable road users. Which is why I'm so excited to be moderating this panel today and to introduce you to our amazing panelists. Our first panelist is Ashley Davies. Ashley Davies moved to Northeast Tennessee 11 years ago from Florida to receive her master's degree in public health at East Tennessee State University. She moved into the public sector in 2013 and started work for the Tennessee Department of Health. She has been with the state for the past 8 years, working at both the local and regional level, and has most recently shifted into the role as the Healthy Development Coordinator for the Northeast region. Her position focuses on built environment efforts involving making healthy choices easily accessible for rural populations, with an emphasis on active living and healthy eating. Welcome to Ashley. Our next panelist is Cedric Duncan. Cedric moved to Nashville in 2012 and noticed how fun of a city it was and might be good for bike riding. He had a couple of bikes earlier on, but started riding in earnest the most in 2019 and 2020. He started an organization called Bike for Equality that helps get cyclists to come out and ride for things that impact the community, whether that is riding to encourage environmentally friendly ways to travel, voting in elections, helping raise money for a homeless shelter, gathering and celebrating Juneteenth, or to just enjoy fun days like Earth Days. He encourages people to get out and enjoy the city. He hopes to continue to encourage people to ride in the city and create safer routes for cyclists to get around. Our next panelist is Lindsay Ganson. Lindsay joined the staff of WalkBike Nashville in April 2019 as Director of Advocacy and Communications after serving on the WalkBike Nashville board for 3 years. Prior to joining WalkBike Nashville, Lindsay was an account supervisor at MP&F Strategic Communications, where she led MP&F's client team for public outreach efforts for the NMotion, which was WeGo's strategic plan. Before moving to Nashville in 2014, she was the Chief Operating Officer of Transportation Alternatives in New York City, where she led grassroots campaigns to improve transportation policies. She also served as the Chief of Staff of the New York City Department of Environmental Protection. Lindsay is a Brooklyn native, and she holds a bachelor's degree from Georgetown University. And last but not least, we have Nick Euler. Nick is passionate about cities in general and his hometown of Memphis in particular. Nicholas left home for a number of years in search of lessons on the topic of great cities, and this pursuit led him to a Master of Urban Planning degree from Texas A&M University and 4 years of life and learning in Germany at the Federal Ministry of Transportation. I'm not going to be able to pronounce these right, even with a last name like Hafkenschil, the Rhine and Ruhr Transit Association, and the Catholic University of Eichstätt-Ingolstadt, and 1 year as a Robert Bosch Foundation Fellow, engaged in the advancement of sustainable transportation. Having returned home, he assumed the role of Bikeway and Pedestrian Program Manager with the City of Memphis in 2016, and with that, the responsibility of improving local conditions for walking and biking. So we truly have a panel of experts here who are passionate about improving pedestrian and bike safety, and I'm extremely eager to hear what they have to share with us today. So with that, I will turn it over to Ashley Davies.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Erin, for that introduction. I appreciate it. As Erin noted, I'm Ashley Davies with the Tennessee Department of Health, and my role as the Healthy Development Coordinator allows me to help communities create healthier and more livable environments. I work with the 7 counties in Northeast Tennessee to prioritize health projects and then move forward by finding funding for those identified projects. Just a little shout out, I do have 6 counterparts across the state who assist with similar health-related projects. So feel free to check out the Built Environment page on the Tennessee Department of Health website to find the Healthy Development Coordinator for your area, or just feel free to reach out directly to me and I can connect you. So today, thinking about pedestrian safety and travel, I'd like to highlight a walkability project I've been involved with in Sneedville, Tennessee. That always makes me think a little bit of a Dr. Seuss town when I hear the name Sneedville, but it's not. It's just a small rural community here in Northeast Tennessee. So I see my slides are up. Thank you. So just a little background. Sneedville is located in Hancock County, which is categorized by the Appalachian Regional Commission as an economically distressed county. The population of the county is around 6,500 residents, and approximately 1,500 or so of them live in Sneedville, which is the county seat. So the residents of Sneedville pull in about an average median income of only $21,000 a year, and this is about half of what the state average is. So a little less than half of the population lives below the poverty line, hence the economically distressed status. So, you know, being able to access jobs and healthcare and groceries, pharmacies, you know, the library, whatever resource they need, being able to access these resources safely and easily by foot is a necessity for this population. The residents of Hancock County, definitely an aging population, a lot of poor health outcomes. These folks definitely need a walkable community. So I believe it was 2017, 2018, the Community Transportation Planning Grant through TDOT, the Tennessee Department of Transportation, opened up, and Sneedville and Hancock County jumped at the opportunity to apply and thankfully were awarded. So with that planning grant, it was KCI Technologies who were that was the company that came in to oversee the planning efforts. Once they got that plan in place, we were then able to apply for TDOT's multimodal grant for the actual infrastructure project. A little less than $1 million was granted for sidewalk repair and connectivity project, and we're still in the very early phases. We're currently in the environmental review phase, and in all honesty, it's likely to be a few more years before any construction actually takes place. It's a long process, lots of red tape involved. I'm sure as you all are well aware with any state or federally awarded funds, but the wait's going to be worth it. So next slide, please. So these are just a few photos of the current conditions of the Main Street area in Smeadville, which is where the project will take place. So the first photo, kind of in the upper left, you can see where that white vehicle is parked. That shows the end of the existing sidewalk that was constructed several years ago under a Safe Routes to School grant. And this existing sidewalk connects the downtown area to the middle and the high school, which is about 1.5 miles away, which was a much needed connectivity piece for our youth to get to school safely. But now we're going to be focusing our efforts on the heart of that downtown area with the construction efforts. So those other two photos on the screen just pretty much show a lack of connectivity with the existing sidewalks, or a lack of sidewalks altogether. There's haphazard parking, a lot of opportunities for improvement here. Next slide, please. And then these last two photos just really show the worn out sidewalks and the curbs that are lacking the ADA compliance, the American Disabilities Act compliance. So you can clearly see that these sidewalks are just patchy and in desperate need for upgrades. Next slide. So this is the overall plan with the proposed upgrades to increase walkability and pedestrian safety in Smeadville. So I know there's a lot going on in this slide. The broken purple lines show existing sidewalks. The solid orange lines show where new construction and improvements will be made. And then the broken orange line shows needed future sidewalks. So around 5,100 linear feet of sidewalk will be able to be constructed or repaired with this grant opportunity. Curb ramps are going to be added. Crosswalks will be constructed, bulb outs will be placed at key intersections, and then safety measures such as flashing beacons will also be installed. So we do hope to get additional funding in the future to extend that sidewalk network to the city park and the 2 affordable housing complexes. You can kind of see those up in the upper left-hand side of the screen. That's a really important piece that's still needed. But as you can see, there is existing sidewalk kind of in the center, the upper center portion of the screen. There are decent sidewalks in place that link the Main Street to the elementary school that are already existing. So it's nice to see that connection is already there for our youth to access the Main Street resources. And then last slide, please. So this last photo shows a rendition of what Main Street could resemble once the construction is complete, with the new sidewalk, the new striping, the parking reconfigurations. These will all allow for pedestrians to travel safely along this corridor. So walkability is an incredibly important aspect for the vitality and the health of this community. And I'm really excited that we're moving forward with this project, albeit slowly. So thanks for your time today, and I'll pass it back over, and I'm looking forward to the discussion in a bit. Thanks all.
And so now we'll turn to Cedric Duncan. Thanks, Ashley. Cedric, take it away.
Hello, everybody. My name is Cedric Duncan, as was stated, and mine will be my presentation will be a little short and sweet. But yeah, so I started an organization that basically helps get people in Nashville out riding in groups, and there's a couple of different organizations that do that, but I started one and we decided to just kind of make it very fun and easy, but also show people the kind of like the options and ease that you can bike around in certain areas of Nashville, but also that in certain places it is harder to bike than others. And so we started out doing a couple of different rides in the summers. And one ride we had about 200, and then some we have like 4 or 5, and so it's kind of just all over the place, but I can show you just some of the things of what we've done. So this is one that we did for Earth Day. We had a couple people that came out. There was about 10 to 20 at the end of this ride. But the reason that we did it for Earth Day was we were encouraging to not only to be environmentally friendly, but just to take a day to go out and ride around and hang out with some people instead of using your car. And so we found that if you're able to get people to go out to bike while maybe leisurely, they just may decide one day that, hey, I can go and actually take these same roads to work, or I can take the bus to a certain point and then bike the rest of it. And so just kind of encouraging people to go out and be able to get on their bike and ride to work that way. This was one of our rides that we will team up with different organizations and different businesses to do different events, such as, so this one was we teamed up with Patagonia, as a lot of their, Patagonia Nashville, and a lot of their message is very much into being environmentally friendly. So we wanted to kind of reach out to them and create kind of like a group ride. And that night we had about 30 people, which was really great because with their help, they were able to get a lot of people that live in Nashville but have never really biked around before, because oftentimes with more of these community rides, you'll tend to have a lot of the same people. But when you branch out into certain like shops and organizations that don't always just cater just to bikers, you tend to get a lot of people that don't ride around a lot. So people came and we were able to like help them out and borrow some bikes from WalkBike Nashville actually, and they were able to. We took them all over the city and we were riding around there. A lot of the people after were kind of saying, you know, like this was actually a lot easier than I expected, and wasn't. Though it can be dangerous during the day, it's actually a lot easier than they expected and a lot faster than they thought. And so it was really cool partnering with them to see just all that getting new bikers out there can do. So this was our Juneteenth event. We had about 150 people out there, and it was really cool. We had to set up about 25 miles of markers to go around the city for people to ride around, which was great. And I felt like this event was really good because a lot of people that typically, just like the Patagonia event, a lot of people that typically wouldn't come out to ride got to come out and ride in a group. And so people tend to find that group riding is a lot easier than riding by yourself, just because I feel like cars tend to stay a little bit farther away from people. And so this was the group. We had one group that did the 25-mile ride, and I led the 10-mile ride. So it was a really great day, and just encouraging people to come out and ride their bikes and get out and be open. And so this is another one from the Juneteenth ride. It was really great. And then this one was right here, right before the Patagonia ride. And as I said, I feel like the main gist of our organization is really just to encourage people to come out and ride, because as I said, when you get people out there, they tend to understand how easy it is. And though it is certain difficulties in areas in Nashville, though, so I live in the West End area right by, I work at Vanderbilt Hospital, and so I bike into work every once in a while, and it can be very difficult due to the way that drivers are here in Nashville and due to the intensity of which people drive here. So as a more advanced rider, I'm okay with riding downtown, but for the average person, I would say it's not super safe at all. But thankfully we have a lot of greenways, so we have a lot of people that ride for leisure and will go into the outer parts of the city, but not a lot of people. No, we don't have a lot of road bikes here, people that bike on the roads here. And so like when people see some bikers around, they honestly sometimes don't even know what to do. And so, but that's what we encourage the most, is just being able to just get up your riding skills, being able to ride in a group, and then just being able to hopefully get the courage and the confidence and the ability to maybe ride to work or ride from your bus stop to work, and now we have the electric B-cycles, and people are using them more to commute, or even they'll take a weekend and just ride the B-cycles around. So, but that's what our organization does, and it's called Bike for Equality. But thank you guys so much for listening. I hope you guys enjoyed the panel of these very intelligent and very experienced people. Thanks.
Thanks, Cedric. And now we'll turn it over to Lindsay Ganson.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for having me and be here today. So I work for an organization called WalkBike Nashville. We've been around for more than 20 years. We're a 501c3 nonprofit. And we believe that all Nashvillians should have the ability to safely and comfortably navigate the city by bicycle or by foot, and that owning a car shouldn't be a requirement to live a full life in Nashville. So our work encompasses a variety of things, partnering with great people and organizations like Cedric. We focus on advocating for safer and better streets for those not in cars. And we do that by building a community of walkers and bike riders, those who want to, those who currently do walk and bike. And we host events. We do an annual big bike ride in May called the Tour de Nash. We host classes, and we also do educational programming working with Metro Nashville Public Schools. And then we also do, in addition to education, advocacy. So we organize people to advocate for change in their community. So I wanted to share this slide, echoing some of the comments Aaron made at the beginning. And this is from Metro's new Vision Zero plan, which is out now. Metro Nashville just released in December Vision Zero plan. It's a really great plan, and it's open for public comment until February 4th. So I recommend everybody take a look. They've really dug into the data and analyzed the causes of crashes, and then also put forth an implementation plan and steps to achieve a Vision Zero, so to achieve zero traffic deaths in Nashville. So Erin also mentioned this in her intro comments, so I won't spend too much time on it, but we have really seen increase in the number of pedestrians being killed in Nashville year over year at a pretty alarming rate, and the number for 2021 is 37 pedestrians killed, so it doesn't seem like it's going to slow down anytime soon, and it's not just a matter of population growth. So we've, and now the Vision Zero effort, the folks at Metro Nashville have really tried to dig into the causes of crashes and why we've seen this alarming increase in pedestrian deaths. And what we've found, and what's now been confirmed through Metro Nashville's data and their Vision Zero plan, is that there are a small number of streets that account for the majority of the pedestrian crashes, both the serious injury crashes and where pedestrians are being killed. And these are our arterial streets, our pikes, the boulevards, Murfreesboro Road, Dickerson Pike, roads that have 5 or more lanes, that have also our busiest transit routes where there's high speeds, and they also tend to, as highlighted in this pie chart here, the vast majority are state-controlled arterial roads. And I'm probably not telling most people on today's call anything that they don't already know, but I also think it's really important to revisit these facts, because this is really the heart of what we as a nonprofit organization are trying to communicate to the general public as well. And so these are just some screenshots from Metro Nashville's new Vision Zero plan, which really confirmed these staggering statistics that we calculated at WalkBike Nashville over the years, that we really see just a very small number of streets and intersections that are accounting for the majority of the crashes. So again, why are these streets, these same streets, where the crashes are happening? There are arterial streets. There's ones with more lanes that allow for higher speeds, that have speed limits of over 35 miles an hour. And another interesting trend that we have found over the years that was also confirmed in Metro Nashville's Vision Zero effort was time of day, that really the vast majority of pedestrian fatalities and crashes that kill and seriously injure pedestrians are happening at night. So which to us, and now to Metro Nashville, I think has really heightened the attention on lighting, that we see such a majority of crashes happening at night that we really do need to be looking at, not just the street lighting, but also introducing pedestrian scale lighting, so lighting that's really gonna focus on lighting up pedestrians in crosswalks and making them more visible to drivers. So why are these arterial streets more deadly? They have higher speed limits, and higher speeds are much more likely in the case of a crash to kill or injure a pedestrian. And also, these are some great graphics from the National Association of Transportation Officials about why speed matters and why designing for lower speeds and really considering lowering the speed limit on some of our arterial streets is really going to have a huge impact on pedestrian safety. Is that, you know, you can avoid a crash, the stopping distance is longer the faster you go, the time to react is longer the faster you go, and your field of vision changes when you are going faster, which is especially important when we think about the lack of infrastructure on our arterial streets, on these major pikes and boulevards where most of the crashes are occurring, that we don't have a lot of infrastructure that allows pedestrians to remain visible to drivers, so that increase in speed can really have an impact. Again, thinking about the history of Nashville, for those not as familiar with Nashville on today's webinar, our pikes were really intended originally to be suburban or even rural connectors. So most of the pikes connect to other nearby towns. So Murfreesboro Pike, for example, connects to Murfreesboro. And it looked much of that way, and that's how the streets were designed 50 years ago. But of course, the problem now is that Murfreesboro Road is no longer a rural highway. Much of it is an urban city street. It cuts through neighborhoods. It's near housing where you find stores and schools and community centers and bus stops. And the infrastructure that's there along Murfreesboro Road has barely changed. So in the last 50 years, although there's been a huge increase in the number of people walking, biking, accessing transit along these major pikes. So WalkBike Nashville has really been focusing our efforts and our advocacy efforts and our education efforts and our outreach efforts along these dangerous arterials and pikes. So another thing we think about a lot, and the people we work with and alongside us think about a lot, is like, are we prioritizing? When we look at our pikes and our major boulevards and roads, which are really like the arteries of Metro Nashville, what do they say about our values and priorities as a city? And how are we continuing as a culture, as a society, as varied agencies and departments, prioritizing the movement of traffic and redundancy for the highways over human life? And I think I just really like this visual from the Federal Highway Association and their STEP program, that when you look at some of the pikes and you look at the lack of infrastructure that we have, and that we don't have sidewalks along some of our major transit routes, it can feel like we're so far behind in Nashville that it's hard to know where to start, and we have various project delays at different points. But there's very simple solutions, really proven solutions that can make a huge difference, especially when we're talking about our major transit routes. And it really comes down to adding visibility and lighting and adding additional crosswalks. So we're really working alongside community members and really hoping to see a lot more crossings for pedestrians along our major transit routes, along our pikes and boulevards, where we know people are being killed and injured year after year in the coming year. So we're really encouraged by Metro's Vision Zero plan. I'd love for everybody on today's webinar to go and check it out. And I put my email address here as well. And we are hopeful but cautious about expecting to see more crossings and more improvements in Nashville along these dangerous hikes in the coming year. And these leadership, accountability, capacity are really the tenets, the principles of any good Vision Zero effort. So we're hoping to see more of that in the future. And these photos are from a somber, sad, unfortunate event that we host every year where we honor people who were killed while walking in Nashville. And this year's event honoring the 37 people who were killed last year while walking is coming up on January 29th, and we'd love if you could join us for that. So with that, I'll turn it back over and look forward to the Q&A. Thank you.
Thank you, Lindsay, so much. And it's really exciting to see some of those statistics that really started with WalkBike Nashville being incorporated and expanded on in Nashville's Vision Zero plan. So that's fantastic to hear. Thank you for that. And now I'm going to turn it over to Nick Euler.
Great. Thank you, Erin. Good afternoon, everyone. First off, thanks to TDOT and TDEC for the invitation to be here today. And also, just a quick thank you to all of my fellow panelists. It's always encouraging to see from others around the state who are fighting the good fight to make our communities safer and our streets safer. So I believe I have control of the slides. Let me see if this works. I think we're advancing. Great. So cities really are my passion. As you may have heard when Erin was reading my bio, I have been blessed to have lived abroad for a number of years in Europe. I've traveled around a good amount and basically have done what I can to learn from the greatest cities in the world. And all of that has led me to believe that all great cities have at least two traits in common. One, they are people-oriented, they work well for us at the human scale, and two, they embrace high-quality design, even if that means spending a little extra money. So as a city government and working for a city government, what I ask myself is how can a local government embrace these two qualities? How can they enact and implement these two qualities in their community? One, I would say we have to concentrate on a public space. It's what's already in the public domain. We have control over it. And I would say it needs to be a pretty big public space, because if we want it to have as much of a ripple effect across our communities as possible, then it needs to be something that's big. So that begs the question, what is the largest public space in our communities? Go ahead and think about that for yourself. When I ask that question in Memphis, I get answers, some of these. Some people might say FedEx Forum, it's our NBA arena downtown, big concert venue. Some parks. Shelby Farms Park, it's the largest park in the metro area, 4,500 acres, one of the largest urban parks in the country. Surely that's our largest public space, right? No. In fact, our largest public space is one that people generally do not think of as being public space, and that's our streets. In fact, our streets, in Memphis at least, our collective network of streets is more than 3.5 times the size of Shelby Farms Park. Our streets are not only our largest public space, they are also, I think, the public space that impacts us more than any other. No other public space touches every neighborhood. No other public space is used almost without exception by every resident every day of their lives. We can't say that about any other public space. So it's important that we get our streets as such a critical public space right. And as a public space, they should be equitably accessible, usable, and safe for all members of the public, no matter how they choose to get around. And the sad truth is that today in Memphis and in most cities across the state, as well as the country, that's just not the case. Because of the way that we have built our streets for decades, prioritizing cars and the fast movement of cars, our streets today tend to be more dangerous for people who are using them in some other way, walking, biking, using public transit. So there are many reasons why we should be prioritizing greater investment and higher quality design in our streets. We can talk about the environmental benefits, talk about the economic development benefits. But safety for me really is first and foremost. And unfortunately in Memphis, as I said, we don't have a great track record. And actually it's a pretty tragic record. I would say we are suffering from a traffic violence epidemic locally. When I started this job about 6 years ago, our annual number of traffic crash fatalities was in the 80s. It is now well over 100. And in 2020, it was an all-time high of 236 people who died from a traffic crash. Now, to be clear, this is all kinds of traffic crashes, not just pedestrians, everything. But we also know from the data that about a third of this number are people who are walking on streets. We also know from the data that the proportion of people who are killed while walking is increasing, and the number of people who are driving is decreasing. So in other words, our streets are becoming marginally safer for people who are in a car, but more dangerous with every passing year for people who are walking, biking, or accessing public transit. Again, our streets are a public space. So think of this analogy a little farther here. If this many people were dying every year in any other public space in your community, what would that reaction be? If you had well over 100 people dying in your public park, your big park in your community every year, I think there would be outrage. People would demand that the park is shut down until a solution can be found and an answer is found as to why these people are dying. If this many people were dying in FedEx Forum every year here in Memphis, I don't think we would just shrug our shoulders and say, well, that's the risk you take when you go to a basketball game. No, of course not. It's kind of laughable. But that's the way that we tend to think about these deaths on our streets. This is just a modern inconvenience. There's nothing we can really do about it. But the fact is that this is an indication of a systemic problem in our transportation system, in our streets, in our communities. Most of these deaths, I believe, can be avoided. And most of these deaths can also be attributed to poor design that prioritizes the fast flow of cars and neglects considerations for basically everyone else. And unfortunately, we're not alone here in Memphis of having noticed this. And I think there's more that needs to be done, obviously, to address this. We have very limited funding when it comes to building out infrastructure improvements. I'll get to that in a second. We are trying to do a better job of just raising awareness around this issue because frankly, I think it's something that people tend to look over. So as an example, putting out an annual graphic that just memorializes those who died in the previous year while walking or biking in the city. So for example, in 2020, just tragically high 69 people died while walking or biking in Memphis. And we're not alone of having noticed this. We've been called out through national media as being one of the most dangerous cities in the country for walking. Actually, I would correct that, not just city, but metropolitan area. Here's another example, Smart Growth America ranking Memphis MSA as the third most deadliest in the country for walking. To help us get down to the problem here and figure out what's going on, we did a pedestrian safety action plan a few years ago. And frankly, the results were not too surprising. They found that 80–95% of our sidewalks are in a state of disrepair, a third of them requiring immediate repair, meaning they're not even passable. We have far too few safe crossings, mid-block crossings, and so on. But the real kicker was the price tag. If we wanted to repair everything at once, the cumulative cost was $1.2 billion. That was in 2015, so I'm sure now with this crazy inflation we're having, it's a lot higher than that. The basic recommendation was a minimum of about $20 million a year just to stay afloat. And as you can see here, what we've actually been allocated through City Council comes nowhere near the actual need. So as a result, we have to be very creative and innovative in Memphis with how we address this situation. Because again, I believe this is a crisis. This is a crisis of traffic violence on our streets. leading to an unacceptable number of deaths. Any number is unacceptable, but just the rate that we have, of course, is extremely tragic. So as a result, again, being creative, being innovative, we can't wait for the money to come along to start doing the kinds of design improvements that we need on our streets today. We have to use low-cost materials, quick materials, to get some of these safety improvements on the ground as soon as possible. So we use a lot of interim design methods in Memphis. A lot of times, these are relatively simple things you see in this photo, just using paint and posts to try and provide safer conditions for pedestrians to slow down traffic. A lot of times, actually most of the times, we do these kinds of improvements in partnership with communities, with neighborhoods. Because again, frankly, it's a matter of our available resources, funding, but it's also a matter of building that trust and relationships with the communities. We're doing nothing short of a paradigm shift here. For decades, we have built streets designed solely for cars, and we are trying to shift away from that now. So it's important that we work with neighbors and communities to understand why these changes are needed and to get them involved in the process. So sometimes we step out of the way and let neighborhoods just do their own thing. This is an example of the Heights Line project in the Heights neighborhood of Memphis, where they came to us with this great idea about taking a 4-lane street down to 2 lanes, widening a median, creating bike lanes, more protected pedestrian space. And we said, hey, that's a great idea, have at it. And it was a great success, and now we actually have secured funding to make these changes permanent. We work a lot with community development corporations. So here's some examples from the Memphis Medical District Collaborative, who has been a great ally in our medical district for transforming streets into safer spaces. This is an example where we took a really skewed, dangerous intersection, created a lot of new pedestrian space. Mid-block crossings, protected bike lanes. Another example. Used a lot of fun colors. I think it's important for streets not just to be safe, but to actually look good. You know, again, some interim bump outs. This is a downtown intersection. I love this example because you can really see just how much shorter the pedestrian crossings were made through these kinds of interventions. Here's an example again of working with the community. This is in South Memphis. This was targeting Walker Avenue, where we had clocked people driving 60 miles per hour on a residential street, past a couple schools, daycare, parks. So a very dangerous area in terms of driving. Putting in temporary kind of demonstration interventions to get people to understand how we can actually make the streets safer. Showing you using some lighting at night to really make it pop. Using a lot of just educational kind of communication material. So again, neighbors understand why this is happening, why we are demonstrating or testing these ideas. Again, really important to have that buy-in from the community. And this is another project that was successful. It drastically slowed down vehicles. People felt a lot safer walking and biking along the streets. And we have secured some private funding to build out this with permanent changes. My last example before I hand it back, just to demonstrate how these kinds of quick build interim design projects can eventually become permanent. This is an example of the Hamp Line, which is a 2-mile long corridor with protected bike lanes, streetscape improvements, pedestrian safety improvements that started out as a interim design, really citizen-led project. That was put on the ground first as paint. It was a great success as a demonstration. We raised money to make it formal, make it permanent. So here are some renderings of what the permanent version would have looked like. And here's the final thing. We finished it about 2 years ago at this point. It's made a tremendous difference on safety and just comfort for walking and biking along the streets that the corridor travels on. Some other photos showing the final result. Another one there. So again, we are doing these kinds of changes in Memphis out of necessity. but I would recommend all communities consider interim design. They try it, because I think we cannot afford to wait to do more permanent versions. We need these improvements on the ground today. So thanks for your time, and I look forward to the discussion.
Thank you, Nick. You are a man after my own heart. Lots of great data showing where the problem is, and some really fun examples of short-term projects that we might see in other cities on the coast. So really exciting to see them in the state of Tennessee. Thank you for that. So I'm going to ask a couple of questions, and then we will turn it over to audience questions and answers. So to get us started, Ashley, I'm going to go back to you. And it can be, we just heard some great stories and some challenging data from all of the panelists, and it can be a tough issue to work on, a little bit depressing. So as we get started on the moderated Q&A, Ashley, can you tell us about a pedestrian travel and safety project or program that you are most proud of, and how were you able to get to success?
Well, yeah, I think probably the project that I presented on was the most impactful, I think, that I've been involved with personally. I've just been really proud to be part of our Healthy Development Coordinator team. It's really bringing in an infrastructure aspect into public health. I think when people think of public health, they're thinking clinical services. They're not necessarily thinking about our community or our livability piece. So having that focus on infrastructure, safe infrastructure, so people can get out and be active and be healthy. I think a lot of these projects, very small from, putting some paint on some pavement to make a space for pedestrians or bicyclists to receiving $1 million multimodal grant. I feel like all of these projects can be applicable in either rural or large cities. So I think, like I said, that Sneaksville project is probably going to be the most impactful in one of our smaller rural communities that I'm working with. But really excited to be kind of in this built environment infrastructure world and really bridging public health with the transportation sector.
That's fantastic. Thanks, Ashley. Cedric, do you want to tell us about a project or program you're most proud of?
Let's see. So, a ride I did with another group last year, we were raising money for a homeless shelter called Safe Haven here in Nashville. And so we did a ride, and I think it was late December of last year on Christmas time, and it was probably about like 20 degrees, and so we were not just prepared for it at all. But we had a good ride of about 20 people, came out and raised some money and rode around the city, rode through some Christmas lights and saw some things like that. So that was pretty cool. Yeah, I would say that one was really interesting. It was cool to raise money for a local organization. So.
Proving that you can bike in cold weather.
Yes, you can. You can freeze too, but you can bike.
Good, great, thank you. Lindsay, do you want to share?
Yeah, so the project I'm most proud of is actually, it's still very much underway, but we're working through generous funding from the Tennessee Department of Health and the division that Ashley is in as well. They've funded us to do a pedestrian safety study along a 2-mile stretch of Dickerson Pike. So Dickerson Pike is one of those 7 most deadly arterial streets that I mentioned during my presentation. And we are currently working on a community planning effort to put forth pedestrian safety improvements along that pike. And what I mean by put forth is that we're really trying to blend community outreach and input from community members with outreach and input from the schools and local students, with also resources to hire a planning engineering firm to do actual initial conceptual designs that then we will deliver to our Nashville Department of Transportation and the Tennessee Department of Transportation to try to accelerate improvements along that corridor. So as part of that project, in the fall, we worked with the Civic Design Center, the Nashville Civic Design Center's youth design team, to pop up some temporary crosswalks and pedestrian spaces, designed much like a lot of the things that Nick presented, but that we don't do so much of here in Nashville. So we worked with the youth design team to design these glow-in-the-dark crosswalks and lighting and some pedestrian spaces. And we popped it up, and we got a lot of response and input from community members based on it. And so that was really rewarding, just to see the youth, involved with the group, their ideas come to fruition, actually build something in the ground. And then something that we weren't expecting, but that was really encouraging and exciting about the project, was that NDOT, the new Nashville Department of Transportation here, actually went in and striped crosswalk there that weren't there before. So our application and the youth design team's application for the temporary improvement actually pushed forth and accomplished getting more permanent improvements. So that was really exciting, because really the intention of that entire project is to do more of the work that Nick presented and help the city accelerate some of these improvements, and really, not let the perfect be the enemy of the good, which I know is tough in the engineering world, but just to try to get some improvements in space and visibility in on a faster timeline.
Yeah, absolutely. Our need for new sidewalks is just as big as it is in Memphis, and so we can't do it the old-fashioned way. It'll just take too long. Wonderful. Thank you, Lindsay. Nick, do you want to share a program or project you're most proud of?
Sure, thanks. It's really hard to pick. I think just in a general sense, I'm just most proud of our ability over the last several years to, again, work with neighborhoods and residents to bring these kinds of improvements to their communities. We hear such a high demand for safer streets, slowing down drivers, especially in the last 2 years, just with the different traffic conditions in our streets since the start of the pandemic. There's just the demand that's being voiced for these kinds of safety improvements is as high as it's ever been, I feel. So yeah, just proud of what we have been able to accomplish. If I have to pick one, maybe the Walker Avenue project that I showed in my slides. Just particularly proud of that, because it is a neighborhood that, due to some past failures, I would say, with city planning and traffic engineering, the neighborhood where residents are don't have a lot of trust in public officials to do the right thing, and don't really see maybe the need for walking, biking. But through the way that we conducted the project, we're able to, I believe, build that trust and get the improvements that were needed on the ground.
Great, fantastic. Thank you all. I think it's really important to sort of highlight and celebrate the wins that we are having in improving pedestrian safety. So Cedric, I'm coming to you next. What would you say is the sort of biggest challenge that you see to pedestrian and bike access? Or biggest...
Sorry, what was that?
Sorry, I just said or biggest barrier, challenge or barrier.
Yeah, so I would say particular for, as a frequent downtown rider, I would say in the city of Nashville, it can a lot of times be difficult due to the amount that the city is changing so much. There's just so many new buildings coming up continuously, and there's a lot of tourists coming here, and so just due to the complexities of the infrastructure and people being there that haven't really been there very often as a rider, you can tend to come across different loading vehicles that shouldn't be in certain places and shouldn't be in certain bike lanes, and different people that have never been to the city that are just like idly sitting in bike lanes and sitting in their cars in different bike lanes, or walking in different bike lanes, or the problem of the scooters in different lanes, and just like the difficulties with that. And so like the other day I was riding around and I almost got like, my head almost got like basically cut off by like a portion of like a construction vehicle. And so it's just like, honestly, in cities that are more metropolitan cities, I would say like being able to avoid a lot of the construction areas, I would say it's probably the hardest thing and probably the biggest area. So.
Love that one. That one's also close to my heart. We're one of few cities, amongst our peer cities, that doesn't require contractors to keep pedestrian and bike infrastructure open. And so that's a big policy change that we need to see, because we're not going to stop growing. We're going to continue to have construction, so we need to figure out how to protect our most vulnerable road users during those processes as well. Lindsay, do you want to share sort of what you see as the biggest challenge or barrier?
Yeah, I touched on this before. I think, you know, we have a brand new Department of Transportation here in Nashville that's just getting a director hired up. There might be people on today that are part of that team, and we've made a lot of progress in terms of plans and policies, and so I see our biggest challenge in Nashville is to delivering projects in a timely way, and perhaps doing, you know, learning from things that Nick's doing in Memphis and other cities where we're seeing more quick builds and you know, more crash response and faster, more temporary measures while we build out and fund and find funding and apply for federal funding for some of the bigger improvements. And you know, what's really needed ultimately is a corridor overhaul on the major pipes that I spoke to, but we know that that needs funding and years away and transit. There's a lot of different components of it. So I see the biggest barriers. I think there's a lot of consensus among our elected officials and our leadership at our agencies about the long-term needs, but putting programs and staff and resources in place so that we can see short-term improvements and start driving down the number of pedestrian injuries and deaths is our challenge in the next year, 2 years.
Yes, definitely. Nick, what do you see as the biggest barrier or challenge from your perspective?
Yeah, I guess there are a lot of things that could be said. For me, it's always got to be design of the infrastructure. The way the infrastructure is designed influences behavior. So you have a lot of people who might say, well, if we had better enforcement of speeding drivers and writing tickets, or if we just had more education around how to share the road, that would take care of it. Any of those kinds of efforts, in my opinion, are only band-aid solutions as long as those roads are still designed in a way that prioritizes the movement of vehicles at a high speed. So the greatest barrier to getting more people on a bike or walking is having them feel safe doing so, and that requires infrastructure that supports and accommodates those modes of transportation, and not just be you know, checking the box. There's a painted bike lane there now, but it's the adequate type of infrastructure. So a protected bike lane, a sidewalk that is, you know, pushed back from the edge of the roadway as opposed to being right along a 7-lane arterial with high-speed traffic moving just a few feet away. So we have to get the infrastructure right, and I think if the infrastructure is right, then people will switch to these modes of transportation without really needing to be nudged or encouraged because they just feel safer doing so.
It's almost like we built infrastructure completely forgetting about walkers and bikers, and then we're surprised that more people don't walk and bike.
Exactly.
Yes, that's a great answer. Ashley, do you want to share sort of from your perspective what you see as the biggest challenge and barrier?
Yeah, I really mirror Nick's thoughts on this one. We just lack the infrastructure to make it safe, especially in our rural communities. Definitely in a lower income neighborhood where I'm housed, and you have a little, 5-inch white line to walk on, and on either side there's these pretty massive culverts, so there's absolutely nowhere to go. And there are a lot of folks, and this is more anecdotal just from what I see on a day-to-day basis when I'm out, there's a lot of folks walking and biking in this area to get to basic amenities, to the groceries, to healthcare, whatever it may be, and we just simply lack that infrastructure. The planning insight wasn't there when these roads were created to include anything other than vehicles, and I'm just not sure without millions of dollars of funding how we're going to kind of fix these issues. So I think that's one of the biggest issues now, especially in our rural communities, because the option to bike from point to point isn't there. We're traveling distances. We have to go miles upon miles to get to work or whatnot, and it's just that safety and the infrastructure just isn't there. So it's definitely a barrier for our rural communities.
Definitely, and that's a great segue into my next question. I'm coming to you next, Nick, and I've got two more questions. So be a little quick in your responses so we can get to both of them, and then we'll turn them over to the audience question and answer. So Nick, speaking of funding, you know, the federal administration has passed a huge infrastructure bill. A lot of that money is coming to Tennessee. If you were king for a day and you could decide how that money was going to be spent, what would be your biggest priority for investment?
It's as if I've spent time daydreaming about that. Well, first off, I do want to say that Memphis is certainly a benefactor of state and federal grants on these kinds of infrastructure projects, and we are grateful for that financial support because we need it. But I think, as everyone knows, these kinds of grants, particularly federal grants, come with a lot of steps and bureaucracy. So the timeline for these projects is measured in years, if not, in some cases, decades, perhaps, depending on the scale of the project. So if I were king for a day, I guess number one, so my understanding is that even though a lot of this funding is flowing down to the states are still going to have a lot of control around how that funding is dispersed to local governments, the kinds of projects that are getting it, and so on. So the states still need to make the right decision and allocate a significant, if not even majority share of this funding for active transportation projects, as well as projects that maintain our existing infrastructure before going out and building brand new infrastructure. And then secondly, again, in this fantasy world that I sometimes go to when I need to be happy, I would significantly reduce the bureaucracy and the environmental regulations for bike ped projects. It just amazes me at times that a project where I'm trying to build a bike lane or a sidewalk safety improvements has to go through a 18-month process of this environmental control when I know there's not going to be any negative consequences, in fact, positive consequences of it. So those are mine.
Those are great suggestions. Ashley, I'm going to circle back around to you. So what would be your biggest priority for a financial investment?
So in a perfect world for my specific region, I would love to see more development of our rails to trails projects. I think those are so essential. I don't know how many of you are familiar with Northeast Tennessee, but we have beautiful old Tweetsie rail trail that's been converted, at least connecting Johnson City to Elizabethton, and there's an amazing opportunity for expansion to connect other small rural communities on this safe access that's not, butted up next to 50-mile-per-hour traffic. So I'd love to see some extensions of our rail to trails as a different access for people to get from point to point.
And as Cedric pointed out, that can be a really important sort of first step for somebody trying to walk and bike for the first time before they try and bike on streets. Cedric, do you want to share what your investment would be?
I would say my investment, to be honest, for Nashville, I would say like a above ground subway system, just to get more people off the road. If I'm being completely honest, I think that there's a lot of unnecessary people on the road right now that wouldn't be, and I think that it would free up a lot of people to be able to either walk or bike around. Like and even as a biker, I would be able to like just take my bike on a subway and just go, or above ground trolley or whatever, and just go to a certain stop that I need to, and then bike the rest of the way. I think it would just alleviate so much of the infrastructure and congestion problems that we have. So I believe that's what I would do if I was king for the day.
I love that one. I'm a transit nerd at heart, so I promise I didn't tee him up to say that. He said that on his own. Lindsay, what would be your priority investment?
So again, going back to those arterial streets, those 7 roads that are responsible for most of our pedestrian deaths, I look at, start small. Maybe, ideally we do a corridor overhaul, but let's pause for a minute and just look at the busiest transit stops on those 7 most deadly roads and improve those transit stops, add amenities for transit riders and pedestrian countermeasures that are going to make it safe for people getting on and off the bus. That's where I really see our greatest need, where we always have consistent pedestrian traffic, is at those busy transit stops. We know the data bears out that there's an overlap between where people are being killed and injured in our busy transit stops. So the time has really come and gone for improving those transit stops. So that's definitely my first priority.
Yes, that's a great one, and would have a huge impact, and at least sort of is a manageable expense, unlike some of these other issues. Wonderful. Well, thank you all so much. So we're getting close to the end of the time, so I'm going to turn it over to Caleb Powell to see if we have some questions from the audience.
Yeah, thanks, Erin. We had a couple come in. I think so. I wanted to hit this one first because it sort of went off of another point. The point of the construction projects disrupting pedestrian travel. The question, to follow up on that was, what do policies look like that could minimize the impact of construction on pedestrian travel and safety? And then there's another part of that: who is doing this well in Tennessee or elsewhere in the country? So I don't know who wants to start with that. And I'll read.
I can speak to that quickly. It's Lindsay from WalkBike Nashville. I'm a Brooklyn, New York native, so just in terms of pedestrian improvements, in New York, you can't block a sidewalk without, taking some of the street or some of the parking or somewhere to allow the sidewalk, provide a pedestrian walkway, and that's just what every construction site does everywhere around the city. So I think that I think there's many examples from many cities, but just the basic, if you're blocking a sidewalk, you have to provide an alternate route.
And just to chime in on that, there a lot of times what happens is that contractors, the way that they stage a site, if they're not required to keep a sidewalk open, then they'll use that sidewalk space as an area to stage materials and equipment. And a lot of our peer cities have passed a legislation that doesn't allow them to do that, and so they have to sort of restage their construction site to keep that sidewalk or bike lane open.
Yeah, I didn't know if anybody else had anything to add into there. So the question again was, what do policies look like that could minimize the impact of construction on pedestrian travel and safety, and who is doing this well? Lindsay, I think that you really hit the nail on the head there. With there is construction, there needs to be, that's blocking the sidewalk. I think that there has to be some sort of policy that shows, or that allows for there to be an area for pedestrians or bikers to still be able to get past, if you will. So I don't know if any of the other panelists had anything to add to that, but I think that was a really great answer, Lindsay.
I think Seattle is a great, from what I know, they do a great job of requiring developments to maintain safe bike ped access connectivity throughout construction. For any advocates on the call, I would, if you're interested in this specific concern, you need to find out who in your city controls the approval of the traffic control plans whenever a development is coming through, and contact that person and understand what their policies are, and then see what's in place regarding bike ped access. Because that's where that decision is made in terms of whether or not for example, a detour is provided for bikes or cyclists. Yeah.
Thanks, Nick. Let's see. We had another one that said, and you guys might have already touched on this, but it says, what are ongoing challenges to pedestrian travel access? Right off the bat, I'm thinking, finances or monetary support. But what else could you guys give as some ongoing challenges that you see in your day-to-day for pedestrian travel access?
I'll chime in, just piggybacking off what you were saying, Caleb, about obviously the budget being low. I do want to say a lot of times it's not that we don't have the money, we don't have the priority, right? Like we have, you know, using Memphis as an example, the operating budget for Memphis annually is about $700 million. Our annual capital budget is around $70 million. So it's not that we don't have money, it's that the money is being prioritized for other things. So for advocates, I think that's key, right? If you're wanting to reach out to your elected officials and create some change, that's what you need to be pushing on, is to reallocate money maybe for what, you know, historically has been receiving peanuts. Aside from the funding issues, I already mentioned, you know, just the need for better quality design and infrastructure. Maintenance certainly can be a hindrance towards access, particularly on bike lanes. If, for example, the bike lanes are not swept of debris, if they're not cleared of snow and ice in the winter, then no one's going to use that. So does your public works department, do they have a maintenance plan specifically for bike lanes? This is something I've been researching recently and have reached out to peer cities around the country. Many cities have, you know, a standard. Once a month, they will sweep every bike lane in their city, so on. So does your city have something like that? And if not, how does that get started? And particularly on the pedestrian side as well, sidewalks being maintained. I think that's an issue in every community, and it's something that's just being kicked down the road and again, I think in a lot of our municipalities, because the cost is so high. Most municipalities put that responsibility on the property owner, but I don't think that's sustainable in the long term. So how are sidewalks maintained? If they're falling apart? Are residents just placing their garbage cans in the middle of the sidewalk that, you know, creates a challenge for people who use wheelchairs? So, yeah.
I would say one of the biggest barriers, and it's interesting hearing Nicholas talk about it, because I'm from Memphis originally. I did like my first 18 years there, so I completely agree with the priorities and just not being able to focus on how to get pedestrians to a certain point. Because here in Nashville, I will say that the bus system is particularly bad and just insanely unreliable, and I feel like a lot of people live right outside of the city to where they don't feel like they don't feel like they could necessarily just bike in or just walk in. So if they could take the bus to a certain stop and then they could walk to work, they would. I feel like it would really encourage them to walk more. And along with with making better sidewalks and making more regulations for pedestrians, I feel like if we put more priorities into keeping up the bus system and making it more reliable, putting more buses on the streets, I think that it would actually improve the pedestrian walkability probably a lot more, and probably increase the rate of people that are just walking around. So.
Yeah, I agree, Cedric. Pedestrian infrastructure is transit infrastructure and vice versa. We just have to work on getting you back to Memphis now.
Well, thank you all so much. We're about out of time here, so I'm going to wrap things up. I want to say once again, thank you to all our panelists and Ashley, Cedric, Lindsay, and Nick, as well as our wonderful moderator, Aaron Hopkinshield, for that great discussion. As a former Nashvilleian and now a Memphian myself, it's really interesting to me to also compare the two cities and how they go about their pedestrian infrastructure. So once again, thank you. And I also want to note to our audience, our forum organizers from the Tennessee Department of Environment and Conservation, the Tennessee Department of Transportation, and the East Tennessee Clean Fuels Coalition. thank each of you for attending today's webinar. We hope you can join us for our second webinar in this series, which is going to be this Friday from 10 a.m. to 11:30 a.m. Central Time. Again, webinar registration information is going to be posted in the chat box by Caleb. We also have a SurveyMonkey link in the chat box that takes you to a quick 3-question survey regarding today's topic and speakers. Your feedback is greatly appreciated. It helps us shape our next STF&E event. So thank you in advance for completing the survey. And with that, our webinar is adjourned. Thank you again for attending the session, and we hope you have a wonderful day.